you. Anyways, we'll welcome Rabbi Aviad Bodner. So we always have to have a new person. He's making his debut on Torah Motion. So we say a Shechayenu without Shem U'Malchut. So we'll give him a slightly longer introduction. He's serving as the Judaic Studies principal at Denver Academy of Torah, DAT, in Denver, Colorado. So it's only 9:18 in the morning. And he was previous rabbi in Ramat Ora on 110th Street on the Upper West Side, I believe, and taught at Ramaz for a number of years. And he served in the Israeli army during the Second Lebanon War in Lebanon and worked as a corporate attorney in Tel Aviv. So he has a Torah Umada person, as we like to say. So it's a pleasure to welcome Rabbi Bodner to make his present the first time for Torah Motion. Vakasha.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Kelman. It's great to be here. Hi, everyone. Say good morning to anyone on the West Coast and guess late morning on the East Coast and Chanukah Sameach if you're in Israel. I know that Rabbi Nitzarna said before, I know I woke up this morning with the terrible news and we have them in mind, the whole Jewish community, the Jewish community of Australia. We're living in difficult times and just want to give that the proper space. So the title of our time together is why or where is Chanukah in the Mishnah, or where is Masechet Chanukah? As I'm assuming the very intelligent attendees of this Yom Iyun know that Seder Moed has a Masechet pretty much for every Chag, right? We have one for Rosh Hashanah, we have one for Yom Kippur, which is Masechet Yomah, we have one for Sukkot, which is Sukkah, we have one for Purim, which is Megillah, we have one for Pesach, which is Pesachim. We definitely have two Masechtot for Shabbat. We even have a Masechet dedicated to Chol HaMoed. We have pretty much for everything, with the exception of Chanukah. And where is that Masechet, or why was Chanukah not given the proper space in Seder Moed or in the Mishnah? It's a very famous question, as we all know that Chanukah has many famous questions, many famous kashas. I think the most famous kasha is the Beit Yosef one about why is Hanukkah celebrated for 8 days if the miracle was only for 7 days? And as you know, there are more answers to that question than there probably should be. I was taught by my teachers when there are more answers or too many answers to a question, there are two reasons for it. Either none of the answers are good, which is why we need to keep on, or there might be a second answer, which maybe we'll get to at the end. So just remember that. Either none of the answers are good, or there might be another reason for why there are too many answers to the question, and I'd like to answer that question at the end. So with that in mind, I want to reference, for those who are interested in this topic, I strongly recommend, there's a beautiful article written by Rabbi Eliezer Brot from the Sfarim blog. He wrote beautiful, I used it a lot. In preparation for this, and in general, that he's an excellent blog and website, and he's an extraordinary Talmid Chacham, and I strongly recommend reading everything he says. So if you're interested in this more in depth than all the sources we're going to see, then please take a look at it. So with that, I'm going to share the source sheet. The source sheet is also on the website. So Rabbi Kelman, I need the request I'm gonna send a request. Sorry about that. I'm going to share my source sheet, so I'll just start before sharing.
Sorry about that. Sorry.
All good. All right, excellent. So just by having a question in the Gemara about my Chanukah, I can tell you that there isn't a question in all of Masechet Pesachim, my Pesach or my Purim. It doesn't exist. Right? You don't have to ask the question about the other Chagim. It's so clear. There's a mitzvah on Pesach. As we know, the central mitzvah of the first night of Pesach, excluding the eating aspects of it, is to tell the story. The same thing is true for Purim, which both night and day we tell the story. Pretty much when it comes to to Chanukah, it's almost like they're trying to hide the story. It's almost like no one wants us to know the story. There's no mitzvah to tell your children, this is the story of Chanukah, this is what happened. If you go to, again, not excluding the company present, if you walk into a high school or even a Bet Knesset and you put some Balabatim on the spot and ask them, what's the story of Chanukah? It will be embarrassing. I'm telling you this right now. It will. The details are fuzzy. You'll get some mishmash of a miracle of oil and a war and a dedication of a temple. When exactly it happened, what sequence of it is. All of it is not. It's not going to look good. It's not going to look good on the Jewish people when it comes to the history, and it's expressed in the Gemara by having to ask the question, right? My Chanukah. We're not going to read the Braita, but it's a famous Braita, of course, in Masechet Shabbat, because where else is Chanukah going to be, given that it doesn't have a Masechet? So Chanukah is given a whole two dapim in Masechet Shabbat in Perek Bameh Madlikin, so that somehow we can talk about Chanukah candles, because otherwise it doesn't have another space. I'll just mention here we are gonna look at the first source. I'm just gonna say that it's really composed of two. So after the Gemara asks what is Chanukah, so we quote a Braita, which is from Megillat Ta'anit, which we'll talk about later, which is, as you can see here, so Bekafe Bekislev Yomei de Chanukat Tamnaya Inun Delo Lemisped Behon Delo Litanot Behon. So that was the Aramaic part, and it's really quoted from Megillat Ta'anit, which is just a list. It's a very ancient, and we'll talk about it later, an ancient text which was composed sometimes in the early times of the Tanaim, which is just a compilation of many dates in which there were minor holidays or holidays in which you're not supposed to fast or you're not supposed to eulogize and so on. And Hanukkah is listed there, and then we have the interpretation, which is a later addition to it, which is the famous story about the Nesbach Hashemen, which is written in Hebrew below it. But the fact that the Gemara has to ask this question just adds to the question as to why is it there isn't more space dedicated to Hanukkah in the Mishnah. So we're going to go through some answers. Some of them are here in the source sheet, and some of them we'll say Ba'al Peh. The first one I'm bringing here is, again, not the Rambam didn't ask this question, but the Rambam is used in order to answer it. So the Rambam asked himself in Pirush HaMishnah, in source number 2, the following question: why is it other mitzvot are not mentioned in the Mishnah, specifically tefillin, mezuzot, tzitzit, and so on? There's no masechet dedicated to them. Not only is there no masechet dedicated to them, it's hard to find a lot of material even elsewhere. And he says the following in source number 2. V'sibat zeh be'enai lefi shayu advarim ha'elu mefursamim. He says, in my opinion, the reason why we don't have a masechet is because these matters are so famous. Bizman chibur HaMishnah, in the time of when the Mishnah was written. V'ayu inanim yedu'im v'nehugim biyad kol ha'am prat uchlal ve'en inyan mehem nifla mishum adam. Bottom line is, he says, why is it the Rabbi didn't have to dedicate real estate in the Mishnah for all these matters? Because everyone knew them. Everyone knew them. Who didn't know how to tie tzitzit and not tefillin and write the parchments and of course all of the simanim that are probably the most difficult ones in the Shulchan Aruch. Obviously, everyone knew them. And therefore, and so on. So he's basically the Rebbe says the reason it wasn't needed is because some things don't need a masech and don't need time because everyone knows them. You don't know. Rebbe, after all, people learn this by heart. They didn't write it down. We're not going to spend time writing about something that everyone knows. Now, obviously, they don't know that we're going to maybe another time we can talk about why there's no masechet for tzitzit and tefillin and mezuzot, but this answer is many times given for Chanukah. It's like, oh, everyone knows the halachot of Chanukah. It's like it was so famous. I think others have even said, after all, the Mishnah is only 350 years after, so it's pretty close in proximity in comparison to other holidays, and therefore you don't need to write about something that was so well known. Of course, the challenges with this answer, I think, are obvious, but that is at least an answer as to why there's no Masechet for Chanukah. The answer is it was so well known to everyone, all people, kol ha'am, parat uchlal, everyone knew, and therefore you don't need to say something that is so obvious. I'll mention here there's another article written by Rav Moshe Tzvi Neria, Zichrono Livracha. He was the founder of Kfar Roez, of the Tzionut Datit, one of the students of Rav Kook. And he wrote an article in response to one of the answers we'll see later. But he quotes Professor Gdalia Alon. So Gdalia Alon was a famous historian, Israeli historian mostly of Beit Sheni. And he deals, Gdalia Alon, in his famous article called Hayshchicha Ha'umat HaChashmonaim. Did the nation of Israel purposely try to erase the Chashmonaim? His answer, Gedalia alone, is no. But he goes through it, and it's a good article. You can probably find it online today. But among other things, he says the following. I'm just going to read. So this is Rav Neria quoting Gedalia alone. Eino mazkir divrei Rambam. So he doesn't mention the Rambam, but he says Ulam gam hu kotev bepashtut. But he also says clearly, Masher lo hiktzar Rebbe b'mishnatenu Masechet leChanukah. The fact that Rebbe did not make a Masechet for Chanukah, eino yachol leshamesh raya le'ashkachat hachag. It cannot prove that anyone was trying to erase the holiday of Chanukah, or to diminish it. She'ilu aynu ba'im la'asik b'derech raya min hashtika. Because if we were trying to prove something from its non-existence, from the silence, klepei HaMishnah, haynu megiim l'shlilat mitzvot gdolot shemina Torah, kigon tefillin, tzitzit, mezuzah. In other words, again, Dayalon is looking at it from the other point of view. If you were to claim that purposely we're trying to erase Hanukkah and therefore there's no Mishnah, which we'll talk about, then he says obviously that would be a strange thing to claim, because then you would also have to say that we're also trying to erase the tefillin and mezuzot and tzitzit, and all these other matters that don't have a Masechet or much a Mishnah dedicated to them. So so what we have is the answer of the Rambam, which was so clear and so obvious that therefore there's no need for a Masechet for it. And we have on the other end, we have this opinion, which we'll see in a moment, attributed to the Khatam Sofer, which is someone is trying to erase Hanukkah, and that's why it's not there. So we have these two answers, but let's continue to a third. Rav Reuven Mar Galiot, very, very important Talmid Chacham of the, I guess, 2 generations ago. Rav Reuven Mar Galiot was a tremendous Talmid Chacham, is very much known. He was a librarian and an owner of a bookstore in Israel. He had a phenomenal memory. There's actually a very important, I guess, for the service for the community, a very important Facebook group called They Sell Sfarim. So if anyone's interested in buying and selling Sfarim, it's a big Facebook group and is run by a very good friend, Rav Pesach Samer, and it is in memory of Rav Reuven Margaliot, being such a lover of books and Sfarim. So Rav Reuven Margaliot wrote many, many books and pamphlets, and he wrote a book called Yesod HaMishnah V'Arichata, which is about the editing of the Mishnah. And he gives an answer, which I'm assuming many of you are familiar with, and he writes as follows. V'acharei asher chatav Rabbi. Says, after Rabbi thought, shesifro, referring to his book, the Mishnah, yevukar me'anshei madar ha'omdim mechutz le'yahadut. He says it was going to be censored by people who are not Jewish. Shiachretzu alav mishpatam lifnei kes ha'memshala merkazit beroma. And these people are going to then report to the Romans regarding what's going to be in this Mishnah. Navin lama hishmit mi mishnatenu harbe dvarim chashuvim ikarim b'Torat Yisrael. We'll understand why many matters are not mentioned in the Mishnah. Why is it so? He says, such as v'hu netzer mishorshei Beit David, and remember that Rabbi was a descendant of the house of David. V'lo hizkir tikvat Yisrael v'tochalto ha'geula atida l'idei Mashiach ben David. He had no mentioning of the Mashiach. Is not in the Mishnah either. Unlike the resurrection of the dead, which is mentioned in Sanhedrin, the Mashiach is not mentioned explicitly anywhere in the Mishnah. So he says, why is all this? And he says, because the Romans were going to review the Mishnah, and this was something that would be concerning, and therefore Rebbe preemptively took out anything that would be problematic. So therefore, ken lo shana inyan Chanukah v'hilchotea b'Mishnah. Therefore, Chanukah and its halachot are not mentioned in the Mishnah either. Be'od asher lilchot Purim kava masechet miyuchedet. Whereas for Purim we have its own masechet. Shezeu la'asher kol ka'elu ayu lemorat ruach haromim shechashavum ke'inyanim politim. Because the Romans would see this as a political matters, and mentioning Chanukah or the Mashiach and so on. Chagigat hanitzachon halaumi v'tikvat chofshiyuto. And this would be seen as a threat to the Romans. So Rebbe, with his wisdom, decided to not include Chanukah in the Mishnah, because it would be a danger, right? It would be a danger, or perhaps knowing that it would be censored and not wanting to upset the Romans, purposely left this and other matters out of the Mishnah. So this was not a reason, not because everyone knew about it, and it was not because we're trying to erase it, but rather it was because for practical reasons of knowing that this was going to be censored and reviewed by the Romans, and therefore it cannot have place in the Mishnah. So this, of course, is repeated by many others. This is just examples, and you can probably see this in other some academics hold by this opinion as well. We'd like to move on to perhaps one of the more famous and controversial answers, which I was referring to earlier, which is that the Chanukah was purposely excluded from the Mishnah for reasons of trying to actually downplay Chanukah. The source of this, although this is again not addressing this matter, but the source of this is the famous Ramban on the Torah, probably one of the most famous Rambans on the Torah. Probably can't go through Chanukah without someone mentioning it. That the Ramban, and this is on the pasuk Lo Yasur Shevet Miuda Umechokek Miben Raglav, which is the pasuk coming up in Parashat Vayechi. And from here we learn that Malachei Bet David will always be kings, and that the leaders will always come from the Shevet of Yehuda. And the Ramban, very famously, so I have here both the English and the Hebrew. So if it's okay, I'll just read the Hebrew, and those who find it more easy can please follow along in the English here in the source sheet, and I'll translate just loosely. So he says the punishment of the Chashmonaim, of the Maccabim. I'll use those terms interchangeably. They were punished. Shemalchu bevayit sheni ki hayu chasidei elyon, is that they were punished in the second during the Bayit Sheni, the second temple, and they were righteous people. If it wasn't for them, then all of Judaism would have been forgotten. But nonetheless, they were punished. Onesh gadol, a great punishment. Ki arbat bnei Chashmonai hazaken, achasidim, hamolchim ze achar ze. And the four sons of Matityahu, they were all righteous and they were ruled one after the other. He says, 4 of the 5 all died in battle, and at the end, it really came to the punishment at the end, a severe one. Anyone who says that they're from the household of the Chashmonaim, you know that they are slaves, and this is a reference to Herod, and we're not going to get into this. But the point is that there's really their whole line was cut off. They have no descendants left. They were all killed. Why? So for Shimon, their issue was that they became Sadducees. But the rest of them, they were all killed and died because they were not from the lineage of Yehuda and the household of David, as they were Kohanim. So says the Ramban that the punishment of the Chashmonaim, because they were Kohanim, they were from Shevet Levi, and they were not supposed to be kings, and they became kings. Even though this pasuk says that the kings should be only from David, therefore they were punished. So this is, of course, is a famous Ramban. Not to say that everyone agrees with the Ramban, but there's a famous Ramban, and nonetheless, and based on this is a very famous answer to the question as to why Chanukah is not mentioned in the Mishnah. This is attributed to the Khatam Sofer, and when we say attributed to the Khatam Sofer, so you can't find this anywhere in the Khatam Sofer's writings. One of his descendants wrote that he said this, and then other people quoted him. And there's a lot of, as you'll see in a moment, why this is somewhat controversial and why people don't like the answer and definitely don't like it being attributed to the Khatam Sofer. So this is from the Sefer Tameh HaMinagim, but again, you can find this in other places. And he says as follows: Tam shenez Chanukah lo nizkar klal b'Mishnah. The reason for Chanukah not being mentioned in the Mishnah, why is it? Lefi sheRabbeinu HaKadosh Mesader HaMishnah Haya Mizera David HaMelech Alav HaShalom. Because as we said earlier, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was a descendant through Hillel of David HaMelech, and V'nes Chanukah Na'asa Al Yedei Beit HaChashmonaim, and Chanukah was done by the Chashmonaim, who were of course from Leviim and Kohanim. Shetafsu HaMelucha, and they seized the to become kings. V'lo hayu mizera David, they were not from the lineage of David. V'zeh hera l'Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and this bothered Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who felt that perhaps maybe he should have been king or his family. Ubikotvo Mishnah, and when he wrote the Mishnah, al pi ruach hakodesh. So when he wrote the Mishnah, nishmat hanes mi chiburo. So therefore, he did not mention Chanukah and the miracle because the Hashmonaim should not have been kings, but rather his family, the rightful heirs to the throne of David. Um, as you can see, uh, again, I'm just reading Sefer Tamam Minagim, so please
We
note.
could say something else, couldn't we? In terms of the Hashmonaim, they were really enemies of the
Oh,
Rabbanim.
so
Bec
let's hold on to that for a moment. Yes, I'll mention that in passing, and then what you're referring to is, of course, that the descendants of the Chashmonaim after two generations, Yanai HaMelech, we know the Chazal is full of references to it, and of course in Josephus you can see it, and they killed the rabbis and 100%, but that's not what this that would have been the easier way to answer it. That is what the Ramban references later in saying that Shimon's children went off on a different path and therefore they were punished. But the Ramban says the reason for their punishment is because they became kings when they were not allowed to, and says here, and again the name of the Khatam Sofer is that this had to do with a personal matter that Rebbe had as a descendant of David, that the Chashmonaim took the throne without permission and therefore wanted to downplay, diminish, and maybe hide the Chag of Chanukah, and of course everyone either loves this answer or hates it. You can't as in, you have all the people who love to find people there's a tribute to sages, personal politics, and then you have the people who think it's horrible and it's beneath them. I have to say that on this matter, I have to agree with those, at least personally. Again, everyone is entitled to their own opinion. I find it hard to believe, and I think we can prove it, that the Rebbe was trying to downplay Hanukkah. After all, and I think Rav Moshe Tzvineria, which I mentioned earlier, wrote this whole article basically against this idea, and he has a pretty good argument. He says, if Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was trying to downplay a Hanukkah, and the reason was because he's from David HaMelech through Hillel HaNasi, who was also through David HaMelech. So why would there be the most famous machloket regarding Hanukkah is about how to light Hanukkah candles? Wouldn't Beit Hillel also be saying, oh, you shouldn't light Hanukkah candles altogether? It's wrong, celebrating this holiday. That's all because of these kings who shouldn't have become kings. In any event, you can't talk about the subject without mentioning this answer. So keep that in the back of your head. I'll just go through a few other answers just quickly because I see we're also running out of time. We want to leave some time for questions. So another answer attributed to the Gaon of Vilna, but you can see it in other sources, is their answer that there was a Masechet Chanukah. There actually was. It just got lost, and it was forgotten. And like maybe other Masechtot, if you can read here in source number 7, this given the son of the Gaon of Vilna mentions that his father said that there might have been a Masechet Tefillin, a Masechet Chanukah, a Masechet Mezuzah. So there you go. All those Masechtot that we said to ourselves, where are they? Where'd they go? So their answer is, it's not that they were purposely left out or censored. They were. They just got lost, along the way. After all, we know that many sources were not ultimately didn't reach us, such as parts of the Yerushalmi, and even more famously, Sefer Maccabim. Sefer Maccabim.
4 of them, all
Well,
four.
so those were not lost, right? In the sense that they were not lost, but at least at least Sefer Maccabim, the first one, its original Hebrew was lost. We only have it because it was preserved in other languages, and now today you can have it in the Hebrew because it was translated back into Hebrew with the hope of somewhat restoring it. But the fact that we have Sefer Maccabim, which was not passed down to us, perhaps there's this answer that there was. So this that makes our whole shiur much shorter to say, where is Masechet Chanukah in the Mishnah? And the answer is there was one, but it got lost. So it wouldn't make a good class, I guess, if that was the only answer. Another answer, which is again, I hear here in the name of the Chida, but again is mentioned by others, is that Chanukah, as we mentioned in Megillat Ta'anit. Megillat Ta'anit was a list of the holidays, minor holidays. Megillat Ta'anit was a text that was that people had access to. And the fact that it's mentioned in Megillat Ta'anit is enough. Oh, you don't need it in the Mishnah if it's in Megillat Ta'anit. Megillat Ta'anit is a authoritative source which has all of the minor holidays, that are the ones that we don't observe anymore, and it's there. So why do we need a Masechet for it? I'll mention now Baal Peh. So we mentioned earlier, so I guess we don't have to mention that one. that of course the answer, because of the descendants of the Maccabim, all or many of them became Tzdukim, Sadducees, and then ultimately were fighting and murdered many of the Chachamim. So that might be another answer why they were excluded. Another answer attributed to Rav Soloveitchik, I didn't see it. I didn't see explicitly written by him, but then again, I didn't review everything he wrote. But many of his students quote him. Rav Soloveitchik says that the reason why there's no Masechet for Chanukah, or why Chanukah is somewhat downplayed, is because Chanukah, unlike Purim, where the enemy is from outside trying to kill us, on the same for Pesach, outside trying to kill us, Chanukah is something we did to ourselves. So while we like to talk about the Greeks, if it wasn't the Hellenized Jews who defiled the Bet HaMikdash, well, we wouldn't have this whole thing. So it's actually an internal fighting between Jews, and therefore not to publicize this shame and embarrassment, we don't have a Masechet for Chanukah, which is a pretty unique perspective to look at it. So like, it's not us against them, it's actually us against us, which is why. That's another answer. Another answer that's given is that maybe on the more Hasidic, Kabbalistic ideas of Chanukah being a representative of Torah Sheba'al Peh, being the Chag of the Chachamim, right? It's not a Chag, it's not in the Torah, it's not even in the Bibles. Purim it's really all of the Chachamim, and as such, then of course it should be Ba'al Peh. Like you shouldn't have them. Even the Mishnah was written in Torah Sheba'al Peh, but it's already written, and Chanukah should always be an oral Chag as a representative of this idea of Torah Sheba'al Peh, and many other answers have been given to this question. So these are all very, very nice. And as I mentioned earlier, that sometimes when there are too many answers, it means that none of them are particularly excellent, which is what needs them. So now what I'd like to do is actually, which probably if I was more honest, I would have given to you in the beginning. Chanukah is mentioned in the Mishnah. There's no Masechet in the Mishnah, but Chanukah is definitely mentioned in the Mishnah many times. Some like to say 8. I don't think it's exactly 8. I think it's 7, and maybe you can find a reference to 8, or maybe it's more. But people like 8, so you like to find things in 8s, especially during this Chag. So we'll just mention just all the mentionings that I collected here for Chanukah, go over them in the Mishnah, and perhaps the answer as to why there's no Masechet Chanukah will be obvious. In Masechet Bikurim, and again, just because of time, and so we can have time for questions, and also I know that we want to have a break. So in Masechet Bikurim, they only mention in the Seder Zra'im for Chanukah. We're just told that you can bring, according to one opinion here, as in you can bring the Bikurim mehachag ve'ad Chanukah mevi ve'ino koreh. So Chanukah has some kind of a marker, at least from the seasonal point of view, as the marker of the winter, and you can still bring your Bikurim from Sukkot to Chanukah, but you don't read it anymore because it's not the ideal time, which gives us the marker of when Chanukah is, as in pretty much in the winter. We have then the more famous mentionings of Chanukah in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, where we are told that the shluchim, so the messenger that would go out and announce the new month, would not go every month, but would go only specific months. Elul for Rosh Hashanah, Tishrei for the Chagim, and then Kislev because of Chanukah. So they would purposely go out on Kislev so that people would know that on the 25th of Kislev you need to celebrate Chanukah. So it was important enough to send out a messenger to announce when the month was. In Masechet Ta'anit, we're told that we don't decree a fast on several days, including Rosh Chodesh and Chanukah. So we don't fast on Chanukah. These are the words of Rabban Gamliel. So again, we don't fast on Chanukah, as also mentioned in Masechet Ta'anit. Later in Masechet Ta'anit, in Perek Dalet, in source number 12 here, we are told that there are days that are Yamei Atzei Kohanim and Ma'amad and so on. There were minor holidays during the Second Temple period. And one of them was on Rosh Chodesh Tevet, which Rosh Chodesh Tevet is always Chanukah. And we're told that on that day, because of Chanukah, although it's not mentioned in Mamash, it's mentioned in passing, that there was Hallel on that day, and therefore there was no Ma'amad in the morning because of Hallel. So we're also told that there's Hallel on Chanukah. Obviously, this is about Chanukah. This is not about Rosh Chodesh. If you remember, the Hallel we send Rosh Chodesh is a minhag. It's not a minadin, which is why Sfaradim don't say bracha and so on, and why we say Chatzi Hallel Ashkenazim. In any event, we now learn that we say Hallel on Chanukah. In Masechet Megillah, we're told that there's Torah reading on Chanukah. So we're told that on special times there's Torah readings, and it gives us the whole list here. And then the following, that's a Mishnah Dalet and Mishnah Vav, we're told explicitly that on Chanukah we read the Nezi'im, which we do until today. We read the Naso starting tomorrow morning. So we're told that there's Torah reading on Chanukah, and we read the Nezi'im. In Masechet Moed Katan, here in source number 14, we're told that on Rosh Chodashim, Chanukah, and Purim, again, we don't eulogize. There's no wailing, at least for the professional wailers. There's on Chanukah, and in the same breath as Rosh Chodesh and Chanukah and Purim is mentioned. And then, of course, there's the famous Mishnah that everyone's familiar with in Baba Kama, which has to do with the tort laws regarding Chanukah. What happens if you're the camel
Oh,
and
I
the
sent that.
ox?
I didn't see it.
And everyone is familiar with this. And says, and then there's a question of what happens if there's a candle outside the store and the camel's going through, and then it catches fire, and who's responsible. And there's the famous opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that says when it comes to if it's a Hanukkah candle, then the shopkeeper would not be liable because he's obligated to have the candle outside. So now, if you look at this, and if you put all these Mishnahs together, what you get is you get the following pattern. You're told that you learn that you need to light, or at least supposed to light a candle outside your house. You know that it's in the winter. You know that it's important enough to celebrate it that you need to send a messenger out there on Kislev. You're also told that you're not supposed to fast on it. You're told that there's Hallel. You're told that there's Torah reading, and specifically what the Torah reading is, and that there's no wailing or eulogizing on Hanukkah. I think from the pattern here, I think it's quite clear. I think the simple answer as to why there's no Masechet for Hanukkah is because there's no need for a Masechet for Hanukkah. Listen, to my question before, there are so many answers to the question of why there's no Masechet for Hanukkah, and many times if there are too many answers to a question, it's not because none of the answers are good, it's because the question isn't so good. The question is not a real question. It's not a real kasha as to why there's no Masechet in Hanukkah. I think if you look at it, there's not enough. And the truth is that the whole framing of the question, which is a little misleading, I think, for everyone, is as if there's a Masechet for every single holiday. Yes, there's a Masechet called Masechet Megillah. But if you look at Masechet Megillah, the vast majority of the Masechet has nothing to do with Purim. It has to do with writing Sefer Torah and Torah reading. And okay, there's a little Purim. Probably, I don't know, less than 30% of the Masechet has to do with Purim. And frankly, if you look at Masechet Psachim and you say to yourself, how much is it connected to what we actually do on Pesach? I'd say 85% of it has to do with Korban Pesach, which you don't even observe today. So only the last parak has to do with the Seder, and then the first few Mishnayot have to do with the Bdika Chametz, and everything else is all about something we don't do today. And if the same is true for Masechet Rosh Hashanah, how much of it has to do with the shofar? Very little. Most of it is about the new month and so on. The truth is that there's no Masechet, or at least my opinion, there's no Masechet for Chanukah, because there's no need for Masechet for Chanukah. No need. You're not going to make a whole Masechet for Chanukah. First of all, while everything else is mentioned elsewhere, so you're going to have a whole Masechet, so you can have a Machloket Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai about whether you light up or you light down. There's not enough of a reason for a Masechet and to have dedicated space. So to a certain degree, I think many of these answers, beautiful answers, nice drushas, and you can talk about it all day long, but from an emet perspective, it's hard to justify or to understand. It's quite clear there's no Masechet for Chanukah because there's no need for Masechet for Chanukah.
Why is there a Masechet for Purim?
Excuse me?
Why is there a Masechet for Purim, the Book of Esther, when Hashem's name is not even mentioned?
Okay, so that maybe if Rabbi Kelman has a Yom Yom for Purim and he wants to invite me, and we can talk about Purim.
All right. Okay.
But definitely, I think it's, again, as I mentioned, there's a Masechet dedicated to Megillah, but it's not all about Purim. It's not. Maybe if we got a Masechet about candle lighting and we wanted to throw in Perek Bameh Madlikin and some of this, maybe you can muster up enough Mishnayot. I don't think there's enough, but then to dedicate a Masechet to it. But Masechet Megillah.
What I'm getting at is that there's a problem with Purim as well. It's because there is. And with Esther being the queen, unmarried to Achashverosh, it gets very complicated.
The challenges of the Purim are well known, and they're definitely worth dedicating more time to. But our focus now is on Hanukkah. So I'm going to stop here. I tried to stay in the right time limit, Rabbi Kelman. So if there are any questions or comments, concerns, thoughts, this might be the right time.
And if
I have one.
Thank you very much. And that's pointed out in the chat, of course, what the holiday we didn't mention. No Masechet on Shavuos either, of course. It's subsumed under Pesach, but yes.
Yeah.
Okay, we have 1 minute for questions, and we're going to take our 50-minute break. And then we will resume at 12:10. Rabbanit Gila Rosen from Israel, where it is Chanukah already. Then Dr. Jonathan Milevsky from here making his debut on Torah in Motion. And a colleague of mine at Tannenbaum Chat, got his PhD at McMaster here in Canada. And then we'll conclude with Rachel Sharansky Danziger. So that will be our 3 afternoon shiurim. But they have a very brief time for questions. I'll leave the screen on, but 15 minutes, go peel the potatoes or whatever you want to do. And okay, any questions? But thank you, Rav Aviad. Okay.
One quick question, may I, Rabbi?
Yeah,
What of the concept that Hanukkah really was the celebration of Sukkot, which couldn't be celebrated under the Yevanim, of course?
So before we continue, I just will say, if you want the answer to that question, our Thursday night Parsha Shir was all about that question. That was what the Shir was about.
Oh,
Sukkot and Chanukah. So if you want to answer Aviad in 14 and a half seconds, Vakasha.
It's okay. Is it on tape?
Oh, it really was. There's a lot. Like I say, Baruch Hashem got 7 figures. There's a lot. I talk about everything.
I have something to say, but I'm going to leave it alone.
Yeah.
He's not really entertaining.
Was it recorded?
I'll just mention in the Sefer Maccabim, the second book of Maccabees, it's mentioned that the reason for the 8 days is because of the fact that Sukkot couldn't be celebrated that year because of the Bet Hamikdash in the Tumah state, and therefore there's an other parallels the fact that it's hard to understand the rationale of Beit Shammai of saying doing less and less every single day, as in Beit Hillel sounds much more obvious. But the fact that it goes down is the only other time we see it is in the Parei Chag, in the Korbanot Parei Chag of Sukkot, and that's another parallel. Those are the two that jump to mind when we think about the connections. But of course, we know from other sources that that's not the fact that Sefer Maccabim says that Sukkot, that Chanukah was observed as a Sukkot, doesn't necessarily mean that's the only answer. I think there are more obvious reasons as to why 8 days were celebrated, because the other dedications of the temple or the Mishkan were also in 8 days, and I think that's the more obvious answer to the question of why 8 days. With all due respect to the Beit Yosef who asked the question, I think it's quite clear that the 8 days have to do with the Chanukah of the Mishkan, and not the miracle of oil that might have been for 1 or 8 or days. So we'll leave it at that. Thank you, Rabbi Kelman, again for having us. And
our pleasure. Thank you very much. We look forward to having you our Purim Yom Ayun. For sure, and then we'll see in between. Okay, thank you. Okay, everybody, we'll resume in about 14 minutes, and you don't have to. You can turn off your video, then turn it back on, and you have a moment to invite a friend. We got still 2 hours ahead of us after this, so please invite a friend who's not here to come join us. That's our best way for you to say thank you for what we do. Okay, thank you very much, and we'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you.